Hello friends, this teaching is about spiritual maturity. Before we dive into the meat of this topic, let's take a quick look at an object lesson from the life of Abraham. As you may remember, God promised an elderly and childless Abraham that he and his offspring would become a great nation with many blessings. In the years that followed, he first had a son named Ishmael, who was conceived with a bondservant named Hagar when Abraham and his wife got a bit antsy and tried to achieve what God promised using their own efforts. Later, Abraham had a second son, Isaac, conceived with Sarah according to God's promise. As time went on, Isaac was weaned, and Abraham held a big feast to commemorate the occasion. You see, back in ancient times, the weaning of a child marked an especially important milestone in a child's life, the point in which they were considered mature enough to thrive even in the challenging environment of the ancient world. There was one problem though at the celebration. Ishmael was mocking Isaac during the feast. When Sarah saw this, she pleaded with Abraham and had both Ishmael and his mother Hagar permanently expelled from the household. In Galatians chapter 4, Paul explains that the two mothers, Hagar and Sarah, allegorically represent two covenants. Hagar represents a covenant based on adherence to the law that ultimately brings bondage to those under it. The offspring of this approach is a works-based self-effort and striving, as illustrated in Ishmael's conception. Sarah, however, represents a covenant based on believing God, which then liberates those who rest in his promises. Hebrews 5:13 states, "For everyone who partakes only of milk is unacquainted with the word of righteousness, for he is an infant." This tells us that spiritual immaturity stems from not having become sufficiently acquainted or pierced with the word of righteousness. That is, that Jesus Christ, who knew no sin, became sin so that we would become the righteousness of God in Christ. Our righteousness comes by faith in Jesus. And so, the process of spiritually maturing can only begin to occur when we are weaned from thinking that our righteousness comes from our own effort or performance. Now recall what happened when Isaac was weaned, and consider the parallels to our own situation. It's at this point of weaning that we can expel an old covenant-based legalistic mindset represented in Hagar, along with the mocking voice of measuring our own self-effort and works, as represented in Ishmael. This mocking voice ultimately leads to two possible outcomes: self-righteousness or self-deprecation. Expelling that voice keeps us from falling into either of these traps. Now let's take a look at the next verse in Hebrews 5. "But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to distinguish between good and evil." Once we are spiritually mature enough to move on to solid food, or meat, we are ready to train our spiritual senses to distinguish good and evil. Notice that this distinguishing between good and evil does not come from simply knowing the law, but rather from our ability to sense and discern what God is saying through our union with Him. This is how Jesus lived, and this is how Adam and Eve were called to live in the garden before they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Once they ate from that tree, they started to distinguish between good and evil for themselves, rather than from relationally engaging God. Consider when the teachers of the law brought a woman caught in adultery to Jesus, and asked if she should be killed just as the law states. Jesus was so tuned into what the Spirit was saying that he was able to bring forth an outcome whereby the woman was not only released from being condemned, but was also set free to go forward on a new path. His maturity in sensing what the Spirit was saying enabled him to properly discern good and evil, while also giving him the wisdom and ability to then live it out. Jesus had many similar run-ins with the religious leaders of his day, and each time he demonstrated this type of spiritual maturity. And so, rather than just deciding in and of yourself what is good or what is evil in a given situation, you have the ability to engage God and hear what He is saying through your connection with Him. He is, after all, the ultimate source and knowledge of all that is good. Now remember that this process of discernment using your spiritual senses occurs through practice, which means that you will get more adept at it as you continue to train in it. Spiritual maturity is about more than a law, or even a religion. It's about your union with God and your righteousness in Jesus, which allows you to relationally and intimately know Him. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out our other videos.